Michael and Gregory, thank you for talking to us. Before we get on to your own involvement with marriage equality here in Australia, can you tell me why it's such an important issue to you?
I'm really passionate about marriage equality because for me the underlying issue is discrimination and how it impacts on the welfare and well-being of people who are same-sex relationships, or people who would want to be in a same-sex relationship, who are in a relationship that they currently aren't in a position to get married, and how that impacts their well-being psychologically, physically, and ultimately whether it comes down to the lives of young people and suicide. So that's mitigating those risks is what it comes down to me about.
And you come from a Jewish background yourself.
I was brought up in a Jewish context. That was my family's upbringing, the religion. I'm not really, I don't practice religious belief these days, but that's where I come from. And so I have a particular connection to the Jewish community and activism within the Jewish community, and in raising awareness around the issues that face people in the Jewish community who are same-sex attracted and gender diverse, and in amongst that are issues like marriage equality and how homosexuality is considered within the Jewish context.
How did you get involved yourself with the marriage equality campaign, both of you?
Oh, look, well before I met Gregory, I was, out there protesting and raising awareness. We've been together now, 7 years? And going to rallies and writing letters to politicians. It's been a very arduous process, coming over now 11 years of doing this, and even longer in broader terms regarding discrimination, equality for me, not just around marriage equality.
11 years ago, the main parties, such as the ALP and the Liberals, certainly hadn't come on board with marriage equality. The ALP, many of their MPs and members are now supportive, and even some Liberals.
Yes.
The Greens have probably been on board of the main parties the longest. But 11 years ago, when you started campaigning, what was the reaction like from the LGBTQI community?
Well, the reaction to
marriage equality.
Well, at that stage back in 2004 was when we had the amendment to the Marriage Act that said marriage was between a man and a woman to the exclusion of all other people. Up until that point, there hadn't been a particular twist on what marriage equality was or wasn't, and how we could or couldn't have it. And so I guess we were devastated when that legislation passed.
I think as a people, as a community, I'll broadly say the gay community have come a long way with equality in Australia, with the decriminalisation of sex, homosexuality, and I think that when the Howard government changed the laws, that was a pivotal moment for the community, where we realised that we're not quite there yet. And even with marriage equality, we've still got a long way to go in how we address gender diversity and sexuality issues, and how we accept those into mainstream. And I think that's my main focus here, is that it doesn't matter who you are, you're a person, you're entitled to be treated like everybody else. And that's the main driver for me, to tell me that it's okay to be gay, but it's not okay that I can celebrate my relationships the same way that everybody else does, is just quite offensive to me. So I will work and continue to work in my limited capacity, when you're working for a wage as well, but I'll continue to work to strive to make sure that we can overturn that, because it's unjust. The Australia that I grew up in, even though it was homophobic, and the family that I grew up in was one that was based on social justice. What's good for the people? What is it that the people need, so the community needs, to function properly? And this is a key part of Australia, is that we treat each other in a sense of equality, in a sense of fairness, unless you're gay, unless you're transgendered, unless you're a lesbian, unless you're intersex, then you don't get treated the same. And that's the thing that we need to break down. That's the barrier we need to overcome, and we need to have Australia to be truly a place where everybody can participate equally.
And to that end, when you have a family scenario where you would have several children, and one of the children might be gay or lesbian or bisexual or just not heterosexual, and what parent would say to that child, well, all your brothers and sisters, we want them to get married to the person they love, but we're not going to let you We're not going to celebrate your relationship, and we won't campaign for your right to get married. What parent would ever say that to their children? They wouldn't. So I can't imagine any family that would ever want to discriminate between their children, between the siblings, and say to some of them, well, you can get married, but you guys, we don't really think that you're worthy of marriage. No family would ever do that.
Why do you think Australian politicians have been so slow to come on board with the issue?
Well, they're scared. They're scared of vocal minority. They claim that the gay lobby is the vocal minority, but it's the Christian lobby that's the vocal minority. And they are an underrepresented, they're a small organisation that claims to represent all Australian Christians, when in fact they barely represent any Christians, and they have a large sway in government with the politicians. And politicians listen to these loud people who tell lies all the time. And they're scared to actually listen to the 75% of Australians who want marriage equality.
You just mentioned the 75% figure.
Thereabouts, yeah.
Why do you think more and more Australians have come out in support?
Because they see same-sex couples as normal, decent people. The marriage equality campaign has been incredibly successful at raising awareness of just how ordinary we are in our ordinary relationships, being ordinary citizens, doing ordinary things. And there's no reason why those people, being us, should be treated any differently. And I think Australians have that sense of fairness and want to see all citizens treated equally.
And I think that part of the process in the acceptance of people, gay people in Australian community, is that now you can actually be out. So you can take your partner home with you. You can introduce your partner to your friends. Now, that wasn't something that was ever heard of doing in the 70s and the 80s when I grew up. It was very much frowned upon if you were gay. You kept that quiet, so nobody ever wanted to know anything about it. But that's changed. So a natural extension of that is, if you're actually out there literally, in a loving relationship, and families see that, it's actually that natural extension again. It is that everybody, our society generally expects that you pair off with somebody, and generally that's the way it happens. So now, why aren't gay people doing that? And the answer is because we're not allowed, and the normal people say, well, that's crazy, and there's your 75%.
And the reason, you touched on it before, the decriminalisation of homosexuality. Every time a barrier has been overcome, we become closer to being part of society, as a functioning, equal part of society. So remove the criminality of homosexuality, allow us to be treated equally with our employment, allow us to have our relationships recognised under the law, allow us to adopt, allow us to get married. And every time you remove one of those obstacles, we actually become equal to everybody else in society, to the point where, when there's no legal impediment to our equality, there will be no problem with homosexuality, and there will be no problem with transgender people, and there will be no problem with bisexual people. All those problems will eventually go away when the law treats us equally.
You've both talked about exposure and showing that LGBTQI people, or people who identify with those labels under the rainbow, lead quote-unquote normal lives in many ways. You were on a documentary recently called Living with the Enemy.
Yes.
Do you think that helped in the debate?
Oh yeah, absolutely. People would approach us in the streets, on public transport, wherever they saw us, after the show went to air, September 2014, and would say thank you for that. It allowed us to talk about in our workplace or at home with our family. Not that it had huge exposure, it was only on SBS. If it had been on mainstream commercial television, it would have been a far wider audience. But people did see it, and they did thank us for saying the things we said, for speaking out against this injustice represented by a bigoted Christian religious person.
We've talked about the polls, which show the majority of the public do support marriage equality. Of course, in recent months, Malcolm Turnbull has talked about a huge poll, the Plebiscite.
Yeah.
What are your views on the Plebiscite?
I think that it is one of the most offensive things I've ever heard of. It's bad enough that the Liberal and Labor parties voted to change the Marriage Act in 2004. That was quite offensive too. But now to actually suggest that my rights as a citizen of Australia are open to a popular vote is just offensive beyond belief. It just turns my stomach to think that people think that this is an okay thing to do. And look, there are people who have said to me, "I'll vote for you. I'll vote for this. I'll vote. Let's make this happen. I'll vote because we'll win the vote." But what people don't understand is I actually don't want them to vote for my rights at all. I don't expect that I'm entitled to vote on somebody else's life and their human rights. Why on earth are you thinking it's okay to vote on mine? So from that level, I think it is a disgusting tactic that Abbott put in place, and for Turnbull to perpetuate that idea, I find it to be just completely offensive, and it should be knocked on the head, and the Parliament have the power to do it. Let's just do it.
The sort of comparison is roughly the same population in Australia, roughly the same population of people in same-sex relationships or who are gender diverse to the number of Indigenous Australians. Now, if you were to say, would you have a popular vote on whether Indigenous people should have the right to marriage, can you imagine that would go very far? I don't think so, but yet there's relatively the same number of people, the same quantity of people we're talking about. So people say, oh, it's only those small percentage of the population, why does that matter? Well, put Indigenous people, put disabled people, or put some other group of people who are marginalised and see how that would go, and I don't think that would go very far.
What do you say to people who oppose marriage equality on, say, cultural, traditional or religious grounds?
Well, that's
Don't
easy.
get married.
They don't have to have one. It's not going to impact their religious lives. It's not going to impact their cultural lives. People of different faiths can get married. People of no faiths can get married in Australia. It's none of their business under civil law what two other people do. If it impacts their religious life in their church communities or their faith communities, that's one thing. But we're talking about under civil law. We're not talking about anything in terms of a religious context. And in fact, there are religious communities who are looking for marriage equality to happen because they want to embrace it. I know that within the Jewish community, the progressive and the Masorti Jewish communities really are looking forward to marriage equality. They really want that. And there are some Christian communities too that want marriage equality. So to say that all faith communities are against it would be wrong. There are some that actually do want it.
What do you say to those people, including people who identify as LGBTQI, who perhaps oppose marriage equality on the grounds that say it's an outdated or patriarchal institution, or we're buying into heterosexuality?
Well, I don't understand how a relationship between two women could be a patriarchal type of relationship. Two men, there is no gender inequality in a same-sex relationship, and I reckon same-sex relationships or marriages could teach heterosexual people a few things about gender roles.
Do you think there's a danger that perhaps encouraging marriage, which is all part of marriage equality in some ways, stigmatises couples who don't wish to get married?
I think that probably yes is the answer. To feedback on your previous question, I think that as a society we've decided that marriage is the way that we recognise relationships, important relationships between people. That fundamental part of our society is to form a family, and the way we do that is through marriage. But the reality is you don't need marriage to do that. People can form relationships however they want. We don't need to put rules in there to do it. Yes, we can do away with marriage tomorrow. It's not necessary because people will still get together and share their lives, which is what marriage is. So you don't need to call it marriage. You can call it whatever you like. But if you're going to have marriage, don't be so restrictive.
I have to say, I as an activist, I seek out the news stories in the media, and I have an alert on Google searching for the word marriage in various media publications, and invariably articles about people's relationships and their marriages, they're getting together or they're breaking up, will pop up in my search unrelated to marriage equality. And no one ever talks about celebrities who shack up and get in a relationship that is a civil union. They only ever talk about the marriage breakup between, or they got married. Marriage is that standard, that gold standard of a relationship in the eyes of the wider community. It is the big part of a relationship.
Do you think marriage equality here in Australia is inevitable?
Well, look, it's going to happen at some point in time.
That's inevitable.
But but inevitable in terms of how long are we going to wait for this to happen. It could be any period of time.
I think inevitability is yes, it will come there. And I think the reason for that is that more and more we see the value as a society in allowing people to form relationships as they like. And you know, Michael and my relationship is a married relationship. We don't actually need that. We didn't need to get married, but we did, because what marriage does, and this is why it's so important for families, it says to the rest of society, this person is the most important person in my life, and I want you to know that. And the only way you can actually achieve that is through marriage. That currently in the way we're structured as a society.
We got married in New Zealand. We were in Queenstown in New Zealand. Got married in January 2014, and incidentally, my parents got married in Wellington in 1960s in New Zealand, and they're living here in Melbourne too. And so we both my parents and Gregory and I have New Zealand marriage certificates. So, you know, it's interesting that our marriage certificate is of same legal standing as my parents' marriage certificate. And people might say, well, our marriage isn't a real marriage. Well, according to the New Zealand government, our marriages are the same marriages. And I don't see the difference between their marriage and our marriage.
How does it feel when you see Australia's nearest English-speaking neighbour, New Zealand, so far ahead in terms of marriage equality and even some other social issues compared to Australia?
I'm proud of New Zealand. I think they're a wonderful country. They're a great role model for equality and for progressiveness. It just shames Australia, and to see so many dollars going over to the New Zealand government, to the New Zealand economy, I should say, is terrible, because there's a huge industry here. Small businesses would love our money to be spent in Australia, not to go over to New Zealand. And I've got nothing against New Zealand or their economy or their businesses, but I'd rather we could support the Australian economy.
And I think what the situation in New Zealand with equality there is that it's an indication that the world won't end. Here's New Zealand just across the water, and the society there hasn't imploded, nor has the United States after the Supreme Court ruling there, nor has Ireland, nor has the UK. These places still continue to function, and there's not much gnashing of teeth that the world's about to end because of marriage.
And there's claims that cake makers and florists and photographers are going to be discriminated and persecuted against. I think there have been a couple of isolated incidents or situations that didn't actually involve anything except people being stupid and discriminating against same-sex couples and doing silly things, and that's got the ire of the Christian loony right.
One of the new political parties here in Victoria and Australia campaigning for marriage equality is the Australian Equality Party.
Oh, yes.
What are your thoughts on them and their chances in the next federal election?
Well, they're mostly sitting, going for the Senate, and in with a chance, trying to get into the Senate a big job. However, while they won't get the popular vote, they will manage to make a dent, and perhaps the way the Senate voting set up at the moment, they might get a candidate in there, which would be brilliant. I think the Equality Party is much broader than just marriage equality. That clearly is a key part of their platform, but it is about equality for all Australians. So I think it's a really good ethos to support.
I have to declare that I'm a member of the Australian Equality Party, and I became a member so that they could become registered. I support any party that supports my equal rights, but I happen to want to support them in particular. So I believe in them, passionate about what they stand for. But then I'm passionate about other political parties like the Greens and other parties such as the Sex Party and all those parties that also want to campaign for equal rights for people who are same-sex attracted and gender diverse.
Now, you've both been involved in a Facebook group called Proud to be a Second-Class Australian.
Yes.
How did that get started?
Well, it was interesting. I'd been a member of a couple of Yahoo groups going back from the 1990s, which was old style or old school activism using mailing lists. And and I got a little bit annoyed that the forums weren't very, they weren't expanding big enough, and they didn't have enough diversity of content. And we were moving into the sort of the new internet 2.0 or social media phenomenon with Facebook happening. And I thought, well, let's see what happens if I create this Facebook group, invite all my activist friends, journalists, people who are troublemakers, rabble-rousers, anyone who's likely to have any desire to want to further this cause, got them together, formed a Facebook group, and today there's close on 2,500 people. It's not a Facebook page, it's actually a group which has regular people contributing to regular conversations. I post a significant amount of content to that group to raise awareness around the issues within Australia and also internationally, because I believe that in order to affect change in Australia, people need to understand the bigger picture and to understand the discrimination that happens in countries like Russia and Syria and other parts of the world, even in Uganda, and to be able to just be enlightened about the oppression and the good stories as well. You see some fantastic stories. You see the hideous murders of transgender people that happen at an alarming rate, and all sorts of things that just devastate me on a daily basis, but also enlighten me. When you see insurance companies holding, two men holding their beautiful baby as both fathers, and you see stories of transformation of transgender kids growing up.
I think what's really good about the page or the group is that it's a place where all those pieces of information come. So if you want to keep up to date with what's happening around the world, and Michael's very good with his Google alerts about getting that information out there, this is a central place to come for that sort of information. And what it does also, I think, is that it keeps at the fore of our mind is that we don't hear a lot of this stuff in the mainstream media. There's a whole media out there that pays no attention to gay issues, GLBTI issues. And this is a place where you can find those things. And why that's important is because it's the fanatical religious people who manage to get into the media because they're outrageous. And this is a place where we can call those lies. We need to be able to call the lies out. And it's a great place to do it, and it empowers people with that knowledge, because then they understand the battle that we're going to have if this goes to a plebiscite, the battle that we're going to have and the arguments that will be used by the nutters.
And I post regularly the content from the Australian Christian Lobby, who post their lies as media releases, the most vile, disgusting lies. It's vile Lyle and his lies from the Australian Christian Lobby. And in order to understand their angle and their tactics, and in order to debunk their bullshit, in order to do that, I have to post that stuff so people can dissect and know what's going on and empower the people here. They claim they're being oppressed, these oppressed Christians, I'm sorry. But they have tax-free breaks, they have huge tax breaks in this country. They have so much advantage, and they're claiming discrimination. I'm sorry, but that's just gets me so angry.
So, how would you convince somebody who's wavering on the issue of marriage equality to support it?
Well, wavering in terms of should all people be treated equally, or should all children have the same opportunities when they grow up? I'm not quite sure I understand about wavering. I mean, should gays be allowed the right to get married? Well, I think all people should be treated equally. I believe all people are equal, and all people should be treated equally. And when you say, oh, but gays, can do everything, but they can't have children together. Well, I'm in a relationship with a man who has 2 adult children. We're not going to have more children together. We don't need to have children. But it's none of anyone's business who does or doesn't have children. 2 people like Fred Nile and his latest wife aren't likely to have a family anytime soon. He's more likely to drop off into the grave than he is to have another child.
I don't know how closely you followed the referendum in Ireland, but a lot of the anti-marriage equality campaign focused on the family and the rights of the children. Who will think of the children? How did that make you feel?
So I find that argument to be a rather odd argument. The reality of our life is that there are a whole bunch of kids out there that have been raised with gay parents, and you know what? They're okay. So I don't think it's a legitimate argument to say, think about the children. Children need a mother and a father. The industry that I work in is clearly evidence that family violence is prevalent, and that it's sometimes better that the children don't have a mother and a father. Sometimes it's better that children are raised by their grandparents. We're not hearing anybody say, you can't be raised by your grandmother. So to suggest that you can't be raised by two men or two women or transgendered people is just not right. The science doesn't back it up. It's only an emotional response because it generates the Bambi effect. It makes people sad because they think you're going to miss out on something, and that's actually not true. They're not going to miss out. In fact, they will probably thrive in a non-traditional family.
There are more children of broken heterosexual homes than there are of broken same-sex parented homes. There are more children who come into this world as unwanted or accidental children from heterosexual relationships than there are from accidental births from same-sex relationships. There are more abortions that come about because of heterosexual sex than there are because of same-sex couples. And to say that same-sex couples are going to bring children into this world and not love them is just outrageous, because the children of same-sex couples don't happen by accident.
Does the fight for LGBTQI rights end with marriage equality?
No, it only begins. Until we can remove all discrimination from the law, where religious exemptions occur for employment and similar, adoption. We've got Catholic adoption and Catholic adoption agency allowed to tell same-sex couples that we can't place children with them. That's disgusting. And for Daniel Andrews to say, he couldn't be happier when adoption law passes but goes through with an exemption for religious adoption agencies. I mean, he's disgraceful to say something like he couldn't be happier. As tweeted yesterday. I'm sorry, but he could be happier if it hadn't have gone through with that exemption. So there's a lot more work to be done.
And I think the key for this for me is when I can hold Michael's hand and walk down the St Kilda Boulevard and not have anybody turn their head to stare at me and not say something derogatory, and I can do that without a sense of fear, then we're there. But we're not there yet.
How can people who support marriage equality get involved?
Look, I mean, there's many ways. One of the great ways is to join up Australian Marriage Equality. They can come to Proud to be a Second-Class Australian on Facebook. They can join the Australian Equality Party. They could go to an Equal Love rally. They could have a conversation with their parents about marriage equality, and they could go to their local MP, federal MP, and tell them that they want them to support marriage equality. And if they're a member of the Liberal Party, they don't want a plebiscite. And if they're a member of the ALP, firstly they should say how disgraceful it was that they supported the bill in 2004, and have lots of conversations with lots of people.
And finally, what advice would you give to the existing marriage equality campaigns?
Well, I think great work. I mean, I don't know what advice I could give them. They do some fantastic work out there. Tireless, the Equal Love team, the marriage equality team, some of the most amazing people in Australia. I'm not sure that I'm placed to give them advice.
Michael and Gregory, thank you very much.
Thank you.